Now that I have been saved from my texting with Sorsha and we have found all of the people we need to find, we are going to get back into it. Jen, if you could take us through H282, that would be great. We already heard from Lauren about it. We heard from Lauren and Nolan about it.
Okay.
You're just like sharing the legislative language with us.
Great.
Thank you.
Good morning, Jennifer Carby, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will put up, I need permission. No, this has happened in another committee this morning already too, they thought. Had. All right, thank you. Sure, okay, great. So we are looking at, excuse me, H282, an act relating to the Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact. I don't know how much detail you want to go through with the compact itself, or if you want to focus on the money aspects. I can at least sort of orient you to what it is.
I think focusing on a slight orientation. This is now our fourth compact.
This one's a little different.
That's the part that I would love to hear. Different part.
All right, so this is the Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact. We would be codifying it as a new subchapter 2 in the Professions and Occupation Statutes, specifically the chapter on psychologists. It starts out with an enactment and adoption provision. I will say it's my understanding, and you may have already heard this, that this has been adopted in 36 states and is ineffective in 34 of those. 2 more are in the 6-month waiting period between adoption and effectiveness. So it starts out with the purpose, but really the purpose is in here to allow psychologists to deliver services across state lines. And this compact is different from others that I think you have looked at because it has a whole list of definitions, but it kind of creates 2 potential paths for psychologists from other states to become licensed or able to provide services through the compact. They can either do a telepsychology route or a temporary in-person for up to 30 days, sort of provisional licensure, or both. But it's not quite the same breadth of your license like you were licensed in this state just through the compact, the way a lot of other compacts work. So a few terms that come up a lot are, one is the authority to practice interjurisdictional telepsychology, which is a licensed psychologist's authority to practice telepsychology within the limits of the compact in another compact state. So we would be becoming a compact state. Also, language to know in here, distant state. This is the compact state where a psychologist is physically present, not through the use of telehealth or telecommunications technologies, to provide temporary in-person, face-to-face psychological services. It's a little confusing because we use distant site in telemedicine to talk about sort of where the patient is. That's not where the provider is. In this case, the distant state is the one you can think of as sort of the psychologist has traveled a distance to be in that state to provide services where they're physically present, in-person, face-to-face psychological services. The home state is the compact state where the psychologist has their actual license. If they are licensed in more than one compact state, and they're practicing under the authorization to practice interjurisdictional telepsychology, then the home state is the compact state where the psychologist is physically present when the telepsychological services are delivered. If they're licensed in more than one compact state and practicing under the temporary authorization to practice, the home state is any compact state where the psychologist is licensed. Interjurisdictional practice certificate is a certificate that grants temporary authority to practice based on notification to the state psychology regulatory authority of intention to practice temporarily. This goes with that up to 30 days piece, and verification of one's qualifications for the practice. The Compact Commission is the national group that administers the compact. Receiving state is the other term to know, along with home state and distant state. The receiving state is the compact state where the client or patient is physically located when they're receiving telepsychological services. So home state is really, I think of it as the state of actual licensure. The distant state is when the psychologist travels to provide services in person, and the receiving state is where the patient is, regardless of where the provider is. Again, this is the language that is being adopted by all states. I've made a couple of non-substantive revisions to kind of conform more to our style of drafting, like not using and/or, which we don't do, things like that. All right, so there are a lot of statutes, a lot of sections that you don't necessarily need to focus on because they're more about the, more about the licensure piece and the practice piece, but I just want to, without dragging you through all of it, find the money pieces. Should have done before.
It's okay, there are a lot of things coming.
There are a couple of pieces, and if those of you who are also familiar with it remember which provisions they are. Feel free to let me know.
We heard rumor that there was a section that we couldn't actually charged a fee. But I don't know where in the bill that is.
Was it charge or set?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm interrupting, I'm sorry.
No, you're not. No, I mean, I think that's,
Remember where the fee language is in here?
There was something with this compact where they charge us a per member fee. I don't know where it is in the compact. That was information I got from them.
Maybe I will just take it down for a moment so I can search it.
I don't know of anybody else who charges us a fee for anything, not police services or anything. Do you?
I
33
I think Lauren does.
I found, yeah,
I guess you're doing the
there's
same
that
thing
one.
I
All right,
did.
here we go. Here's one.
Jen, 1 second, Lauren's gonna actually answer
Oh,
the
great.
question from the sidelines.
We do get charged fees from compacts for participation, so like for the nurse licensure compact, we're charged $6,000 a year. That does happen to be part of the compact administration, just so you're aware of it. I agree that my understanding is that we do get charged $10 per participant of the compact of our resident psychologists. And I'm trying to find the language to Jen, but maybe Jen has found it.
I found one.
Something new every day.
That's why we're here.
All right, so
Yes.
I will put this language back up. I am on page 34 of the bill. And this allows the commission, which is that organization that administers the compact, to levy on and collect an annual assessment from each compact state or impose fees on other parties to cover the cost of the operations and activities of the commission and its staff. And it talks about the aggregate annual assessment amount being allocated based upon a formula to be determined by the commission, which would make a rule binding on all compact states.
And my understanding is the rule is currently, they charge the state $10 per resident psychologist who is a compact participant. That is within the rule.
Do we know how often that rule might change
I don't know that.
and the fee go up?
The fee can go up, but if we are part of the compact, we would be at the table when the rules are being discussed.
We can estimate that to be less than $1,000.
There is also language in here somewhere,
You're welcome to just scroll through it if that's easier for you, Jen.
I think it's just gonna make people queasy if I'm scrolling through, looking around. But there is language in here somewhere that allows the states to vote down a rule that's adopted, I think. So if the commission tried to change the fees in a way that was really alarming to the states member states could potentially vote that rule down. I think that's pretty much what I have.
Any questions for Jen? Yeah.
Yeah.
We sort of really glossed over IT and staff considerations, and I just wanted to make sure I understand those since I'm gonna be reporting the bill. And I'm sorry, maybe I should have asked you, Nolan, when you were out.
I would defer that to Lauren.
So, Lauren Hibbert, the staff and IT considerations, staff likely will not have a huge impact, but IT, we will have to create a new pathway for the compact license. And anytime that we're creating new pathways in our system, there's a development cost and a staff time cost. And then the other important thing is this does increase our enforcement costs because we will now have jurisdiction over people who are authorized to work in our state but do not live in our state. And so that does have an enforcement cost because we need to do our investigations, sometimes out of state. We need to obtain records, sometimes from out of state. So that does increase our enforcement costs. And it will increase the number of people that we have enforcement authority over, which is appropriate because the goal, again, grounding in what the goal of the compact is, we want more psychologists available to practice here. And we always hope and intend for them to be excellent practitioners, but they may not be. So we need to have enforcement authority over those new practitioners.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Taylor?
Yeah, I just, in the difference between the other compacts and this compact, I want to make sure that I understand what's the same. So a Vermont practitioner would be able, if their client left the state, they would be able to do telehealth to that client?
As long as the client was in a compact state.
Yeah. And Vermont psychologists would be able to travel to those states and do consultations in courts and things like that.
If they had, so you have to pick one or both tracks in this compact. So depending on whether the provider had selected that option, which is, I think there's separate fees for each track. So if the provider, the Vermont provider had elected that option, yes, they could go to that state and see the client or patient in person for a temporary period of time, which may just be a transition to some other type of care or closing out relationship.
Thank you.
Sort of a general comment. We reviewed a number of different compacts. They all seem to be a little bit different. Not all of them, but many of them are a little different. So I understand that each one in and of itself is pretty well put together. It makes sense. I understand why it's different. Psychology is different than physical therapy or something like that. But I wonder about the differences amongst all of them, and I wonder where we're headed. I mean, this is not a new comment. It's probably occurred around the room, but I'm just wondering out loud where we're headed and whether consistency is good or not.
Certainly within our statutes, I think consistency is very important. Some of these compacts we do not have control over. I think it's really, in the same way that different states enact legislation that looks different addressing the same topics. These are compacts that are really authored by typically different organizations. And so they have different people drafting them. They may have different concerns or interests that get reflected.
And understood, and I certainly don't have a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Jen? All right, thank you very much, Jen. So this being our last compact of the year, I think on each of these compacts, and Representative Andrews sort of said this on the floor as she explained the revenue impacts of this series of compacts that we all agree makes really good policy sense, but continues to reduce revenues in funds that were, some of them running negative before we introduced these compacts, again, for very good policy reasons. I have an amendment that Becky is working on to look at all of the Secretary of State fees in this bill, essentially, as sort of the last one. If all the compacts had all come together in one big bill, it would have made more sense to put it in there. But since they're all separate bills, we're going to put it on the last one.
Excellent.
So, Ted, if you want to join us and talk us through the fees. So very similar from yesterday with Chris. It's sort of the exact same construct from JFO, that it's, here's the statutory reference. here's the fee, here's the purpose of the fee, all of those things. One difference that Ted will go into more, and Lauren is here, as well as all the rest of the Secretary of State team, to help us with, is the fact that, yesterday there were just really a few fees that weren't changed, that weren't matching up to inflationary metrics because of policy reasons. Here, we might have more because of all of the workforce connotations of what we're doing. So, and, Ted will talk us through all of those, and Lauren's here for questions, so. And those are all posted on our page.
That is correct. For the record, Ted Burnett, Joint Fiscal Office. I'm going to quickly just kind of talk through some of these columns. They will definitely resemble what you saw yesterday for the DMV fee proposal. The main difference is starting kind of when you get to column number 6. DMV fees were largely changed in 2016. With Secretary of State, the dates are kind of all over the place from when they were last touched. And so we have the inflation adjustment reflect the year last changed with each fee as you go down the line. The other difference is DMV fees rounded to the nearest dollar. We rounded to the nearest 5 to make it a little more consistent and understandable for folks. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is here when you get to units, in column 9, the number of units are for each individual profession. These are, the initial is the application fee that someone pays to be licensed. And these are per year, and then the renewal fees are every biennium. And so for our forecast, we looked at the consistent number of units for the biennium when those fees are not changed, and then a biennium when they would be changed, and the additional revenue for each profession. So this was done for, you'll have on the website for the board fees, which if you'll remember, each of those have their own kind of account, and they're joined together, and the advisor fee, everyone's lumped together. And then there are corporation fees. In terms of coloring, all of the fees that are following inflation are colored in yellow. The salmon color are departures from inflation to help kind of show the policy considerations or workforce considerations. So this would be the board fees. Yes.
When you say board fees, is that what the board is recommending for the members of their profession, or is that the fee for the board? Or what exactly does that mean, board fee proposal?
So the board, that would be what each member of that board, so for example, an accountant here, you have someone who's a certified public accountant would pay a $115 initial application fee and then a $255 renewal fee. And Secretary of State has had conversations with their respective boards to make sure these fees would be in line with something that worked. And here are spreadsheets in paper, so you can get your own desk. There are a lot of individual fees.
Thank you.
So this is kind of the big level picture. I don't know what would be the most efficient way to go through this.
I think Lauren maybe might best sort of explain why it's board fee, advisor fee, corporation fee, and why those are the buckets that the Secretary of State. Okay. That the Secretary of State uses as sort of why we have those 3 separate buckets of fees. I think what would be most helpful is actually I think it's fairly clear why the inflationary parts happened. And for me, the one question is the ones that are not inflationary, to get some explanation from Lauren. So unless anyone has more questions for you about how the spreadsheet was constructed. Anyone? Spreadsheet construction question? Inflation. Thank you. Okay, then I think we're gonna have Lauren take the seat. If that's okay.
Yep. Totally.
Is it okay with you if we sat next to each other?
Yes, I love that.
Okay, great.
And sort of
Perfect. We have a share. Okay, perfect.
Well, I'm very enthusiastic about the sitting next to you because I think that sometimes it gets a little wild when people are speaking from the sidelines. It can get but sometimes you really want to talk to 2 people. Thanks for suggesting that, Lauren. Appreciate it.
being open to it. For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State. So would you mind
Yes.
making it just a little larger for my 45-year-old eyes?
Sure.
And if you could even just start, Lauren, by explaining the difference
Thank you.
between advisor fee.
Oh, my goodness.
You identified yourself for the record earlier, but if you want to do it again, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
We have to pay for ourselves. That's why there's so many fees.
Paper.
For the record, again, my name is Lauren Hibbert. I am the Deputy Secretary of State, former Office of Professional Regulation Director. And we are here today to talk about fees. We have within the Office of Professional Regulation two different ways that we regulate profession. One model is the board model, and the other model is the advisor model. So that's why there's two different sheets that Ted has created. It's really two different ways that we manage money in our office. The board model, we silo those fees within a board. Professions are not allowed to share fees across board silos. The advisor model is the opposite. We pool our funds together and the professions can share their fees across the professions. And then also here is the corporation's fees, which is a separate, the third sheet. And that is because corporations is a separate division and goes into a separate fund. The OPR fees go into the OPR special fund, and the corporation's fees go into the Secretary of State fund. And I don't have those numbers memorized. I do have Stacy Drinkwine here, who probably does have those funds memorized if necessary.
Can you just give a quick example, like the Board of Veterinarian?
Sure. So the Board of Veterinarians receives fees from initial applications and from renewals. Those fees are kept within a segregated budget within the OPR special fund. And the veterinarians are charged an allocation of the costs of OPR, the administration of OPR. They're charged for their enforcement actions, and they're charged for their per diems for when they meet, and they also are charged an allocation of centralized Secretary of State, so part of my salary, part of Stacy's salary. So that's how we figure out how much we need to, so their fees are their revenue, and then their expenses, and then their budget. We are able to track how their budget's doing based on how much revenue they're generating from their initial applications and their renewals minus their expenses, which is that more complicated allocation of how many licensees do they have, what is their percentage of the total OPR costs, the percentage of the total Secretary of State administration costs, their enforcement costs, and their per diems.
And you use that to set the fee?
And we use that to know how the veterinary board is doing. And the veterinary board should support itself based on its revenue minus its expenses. And our goal is to always have at least 2 years of operating expenses in the fund for each profession and for OPR. We don't have that right now, which is why I'm here in front of you today.
And so last time, I don't know if it was last time you were here, but last time we looked at big spreadsheets with you, which I think was a few times ago. We basically have, so this is the same conversation, it's just an extension of the same conversation, but we've taken intervening, Ted has taken the intervening time to rationalize that all a little bit more by putting in sort of clear inflators and being clear about sort of when we are keeping a fee more constant because of policy reasons. Representatives.
I would say strongly support the idea of addressing deficits by making these changes. And personally have philosophical concerns around fees being in many cases regressive, and that the work that you all do, I think, is an important public good to ensure that, you know, folks providing services are well regulated. And so I strongly support this move, and also do want to say that I hope at some point in the future, we can think about different ways of ensuring the public good of well-regulated services in a way that isn't arbitrary.
You know, I had a conversation with Representative Meadows yesterday about why do we need to increase these fees? Why can't we pay for everything out of the general fund? And I don't think this was your intent of the conversation, but I'll name that. I do think that like long-term, it would be interesting to have a conversation about like, why do we fund these like certain swaths of government with fees and we fund other swaths of government with the general fund or the education fund? And like, what would it take to actually fund much more of government through more progressive sources rather than fees? That's certainly not where we are today. And I think even an intermediary step, which is doable this biennium, if not this session, is to have a conversation about what to do about your board fees and sort of the closed circle of those and how incredibly challenging that is. And I know that you've been thinking really deeply about this as a team and that you'll come back to us with ideas.
Yes, I look forward to the conversation, and I do want to emphasize that just because I was given an opportunity that the Office of Professional Regulation does a lot of good for things that we never create a fee on. So a sunrise report or a sunset report, a great example of this is home contractors. We started working on home contractors in 2017. I was within this building countless hours. We had many staff hours. We wrote a sunrise report on home contractors, and we are just now barely collecting fees for that work. But a large percentage of our time has been spent on, is it appropriate to regulate home contractors? We found that we should regulate home contractors. How do we regulate home contractors? We advocate to the legislature for the regulation of home contractors. We set up a program to regulate home contractors, and we are just collecting fees in the spring of 2023. So that was a 6-year effort for the public good from our perspective. And it dovetails with compacts too. There's a lot of public good in compacts that do not always benefit the in-state licensee, but the cost of joining, the loss of revenue, is borne by our in-state licensees. And I agree with you, Representative Sims. I think that does, over the course of time, seem unfair, and we need to look at it in a different way. And I look forward to the conversation.
Madam Speaker, I'm
I'm not ready for that motion. It's yours after me.
I understand that fees, the process of collecting fees and using it to balance your function of government takes a long time to get above water.
Yeah.
It really does. It takes that happens with whenever we set up a new fee. It's very visible. But I want to know if there is an answer. Is it sustainability? The reason that we don't pay off this debt that we face right now because of COVID and the refusal of administration to implement new fees, is that sustainability? Is that the reason we don't do this? We don't pay off the debt with a lump sum? Because we have enough money. We could do it, but it would bring us back up to where water was level with our ears, and to go on from there, I suspect we would still be each year, sinking a little bit. I remember years ago when we were doing the fees, there was always a problem that the fees weren't really covering the amount of the cost. And there was a reluctance in the legislature to bring the fees up high enough. This is in the days when fees were always approved.
Mm-hmm.
But still, the legislature didn't want to bring the fees up high enough to make up the deficit. So is it sustainability that's holding you back? Or what do you?
I don't feel held back. I'm, happy to have Becky be drafting this amendment to increase the fees. I do think, the transportation fund is, I think, in some ways an easier example of this because the OPR is like divided into 80,000. That's not the exact number of different funds, but I think the idea that there's a deficit, we're covering part of that deficit with general fund money, right, in order to deal with the hole. And we need to raise the fees in order to create long-term sustainability so that we're not constantly moving general fund dollars into it. But I think it will always be that balance because of what Representative Sims said about, their willingness to pay of some folks and how those things balanced out, or work that departments do that's not immediately billable. And so I think we're always going to have a mix of revenue sources anywhere that we're going to need to work out.
When I go to the administration and beg for fees, the answer is, why do we implement fees at this time when we have so much cash on hand?
I think it's sustainability. Because one of the things that's really great about all the cash we have on hand right now is that we won't have it forever, and we know that. And so it forces us, I think, to think like more stably and long-term about that money, and that we need to use it to like build things that will last
One-term.
rather, and like really be strategic about one-time use. And I think filling a hole is not necessarily the most strategic one-time use, so it's necessary sometimes.
Understand.
Yeah.
And I agree. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Let me try to contribute to the conversation of general revenues, the general good as opposed to fee-based for services delivered. I look at much of what OPR does as avoiding a trip to the Superior Court. In other words, it provides a forum for alternative dispute resolution, disciplining, fines. However, short of that, and before that regime existed, people would head off and sue each other. And in Vermont, we're known as a litigious society for that very reason. So frankly, we don't fund the courts by assessing the litigants enough money to cover court costs. And so if you think about this as an alternative way to settle poor performance, disputes of one kind or another, it would be surprising to me that we would cover all the costs. We don't do that for the judiciary anyway.
Yes, and I think there are some differences in terms of sort of the preventative public safety roles, even just, the self-regulation that comes from a lot of these boards, that OPR just really sort of supports with staffing. I think there's a lot of different functions that professional regulation, and we're not even talking about the corporation fees and the Secretary of State's work yet. Lauren, can you take us through some of the salmon colored?
Yes, I'm gonna ask
I would have
Ed
gone for
to
orange.
help me navigate to the salmon.
Or anything you want to add about the philosophy of any of this? You're welcome to, but you're. Yeah.
No, I just am really excited about the philosophy conversation, and I look forward to it. I think there's a lot of work to be done on how our revenue is structured, both within the Secretary of State's office, within our statutory construction, and then within how we have been funded when we were originally set up, in the 70s versus how we're actually operating now. And if I look forward to the conversation. And I think it's multi-pronged. So the first salmon color is chiropractors. And I have asked to go with the proposed, what was the Secretary of State proposal as opposed to inflation in this area, because the inflation would have set chiropractor fee, I believe, closer to $400 for the initial application. And I want to make sure that that's not an unnecessary barrier to entry to the profession. And so 225 is within sort of the normal range of an initial application within the office. Although, if we look at the advisor fees, our initial applications are generally 115, or what with the proposal will be $100 or $115. So I just want to make sure that in order to be a chiropractor in this state, we're not setting the fee too high. And I do think this is a revenue increase of $25, so it will have an impact on the fund. But just with the inflation factor, since the chiropractor fee had not been adjusted since 2001, which is staggering in and of itself, it would have just made it, I believe it was $425 or something. And I didn't want it to be an unrealistic barrier for new chiropractors.
Too big a jump because we had waited too long.
Too big of a jump because we waited too long, exactly. The next salmon color, I believe, is osteopathic physicians. Again, this was another place where we had not adjusted the initial fee since 2001. I believe that with that adjustment, this fee was over $700, and I felt that was too big of a jump for somebody just coming out of medical school. And we really need physicians in this state, and I don't want the fee to be a barrier to a physician moving to Vermont. Then real estate is our next one, and I do not recommend moving with inflation because this was actually a board where we were recommending fee reductions. So yes, we should always be looking at fees with respect to inflation, but also if we have excess revenue in a fund or we are generating enough revenue, we should reduce fees. And real estate is a profession where we made recommendations for modest reductions. They are modest reductions. We could have done a more dramatic reduction, but as I testified last time I went through this spreadsheet, real estate, we really saw an increase of licensees during COVID with our real estate market boom. We don't know what's going to happen with our economy. Real estate is a profession that's sort of the canary in the coal mine for the economy. We are anticipating that our number of licensees in real estate is going to reduce. So we don't want to make a more dramatic fee reduction based on our current number of licensees because we are anticipating that we are going to lose licensees. So we sort of split the baby, small fee reduction, anticipating a loss in the number of licensees. And I believe that's all the salmon on the board page.
Yes.
Yeah.
Being somewhat cynical about real estate.
Yes. I have to be careful here. We're being recorded.
Yeah, understood. And I'm admitted, I'm just wondering, it seems to me the real estate profession is doing exceedingly well these days or something. So I listened to your argument. I won't have an argument with this, but well, tangential to that cynical comment is I'm wondering, remind me, you don't take money from one fund and move it across to another.
That is exactly where I was going to go.
Right.
Wouldn't it be lovely if I could use some of the benefit from the real estate profession to support nurses? But under the current statutory structure, I can't.
Understood.
So that's the philosophical, hopefully soon to be concrete conversation that we can have.
Yeah, understood. I mean, all hell could break loose, I think, if you started moving money from one place to
You know, it's interesting. I would have said that. I would have said all hell would break loose. I would have said that in October of this year.
Yeah.
That would be a proposal that would be sort of break people's minds. But Agatha Kessler, the deputy director of OPR, and Dylan Bruce, the senior policy analyst for OPR, have been going and meeting with all of our boards. And to their credit, so many of our boards have said, why do we have to silo the fees? The pharmacist said, we think our fees should support nurses. And we understand that the statute won't allow that. But the good of OPR needs to be, and we appreciate the good of OPR, it needs to be better supported by the fee structure, and the siloing of the fees don't work the way that it should. So
understood.
So I would have thought all hell would have broken loose too, but I don't anticipate that will happen.
And I look forward to having that conversation soon. Yeah, Representative.
I'm eagerly awaiting the amendment as you alluded to. I'm curious, for stability purposes, I understand and respect your expertise essentially saying if there's a target of a balance that we should focus on, it's like 2 years of what we anticipate to be cost. And I'm wondering whether or not we could incorporate that idea of making sure the balance is always 2 years. But anything over that goes into, if you will, a sharing device of some kind. I just throw that out for discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea to put in the hopper for this conversation after we are done with crossover and are thinking sort of big picture and even longer term about this sort of systemic challenge. Is there more salmon over here on,
On the advisor,
I just want to make sure we've gone through the whole spreadsheet.
these are primarily inflation.
Yes. So, but the one that was not, is dietitian's original application. Again, this was delayed maintenance of this fee.
1997.
1997. So I forget where it jumped to. I don't have that off the top of my head, but it was quite a bit. I'm recommending the standard advisor fee for an application, which will be under the standardized advisor application fee will be $115. And the reason really is dietitians, again, like most people graduating from school, they don't have a lot of resources, and dietitians of all of our professions in the health field also don't make as much money as some of the others. So I did not want to do that to their initial fee.
In this future conversation, I think there's also, I'm sort of interested long-term in which of these professions tend to be paid by the individual when they're, say, exiting college, and which of the fees tend to be paid in, clumps of 500 by massive hospital systems, for instance.
We have some of that data anecdotally, but that is not a piece of data that we track within our system, but I look forward to the conversation.
Representative Meadows, did you?
Yeah, is it, so for the ones that are 2005, 1997, last time they were renewed, would it be safe to assume that they've been overcharged for 20 years? If the fee was fine for the past 20 years, I'd imagine 20 years ago it was probably bringing in more money than was necessary.
I don't believe that any profession has been overcharged. If you look at our revenue and expenses, what's happened is professions that joined in, let's take opticians, which I think is, opticians. When they joined in 2005, there were a limited number of opticians. I guarantee you, if we have seen, if we looked at the licensing numbers for opticians, the opticians have grown, plus new professions have been added to OPR. So the total number of opticians who joined in 2005 have benefited because there's been more opticians paying into the fund and more licensees added to the fund. And that has worked for our fund for a long period of time. But as I testified a couple of times ago, our expenses have gone up with an IT system, which has enabled us to make change and to process licenses faster. But it has come at an expense. So our expenses have grown, and it has now gotten, if you look at our fund, and I wish I had this graph, it's in my previous testimony, I forget on which day, and I can send it to you. If you look at our fund, we were doing great until 2016 and 17. We were positive $3 million. But then the number of new licensees did not outweigh the increase in our costs with an IT spend and staffing costs. We actually haven't added that many positions since that time, but the contract has gotten more expensive for state employees, which is good. That's good. We like that. But it hasn't, the number of new licensees added to the fund have not outpaced those increased expenses.
Gotcha.
Any more orange? Oh. Pink? You could just call it pink.
I don't remember. So occupational temp licensure, I believe that it was going to be $75. Oh, thank you. Nolan just gave me a great snapshot. This is why it's good to have friends on the sidelines. So in 2017, our fund balance was positive 3 million, almost 3.5. And now our projected fund balance in fiscal year 2022 is negative 2.5 So that's what, and I can share with you Nolan's screen. That is what has happened. And it's that although we are generating new revenue, we have more licensees, our expenses have also increased and outpaced. I believe that occupational therapy was with the inflation adjuster that Ted created was going to be $75, and I requested that it be $70 because the way the statutory construction is, we set at the same, all temp licenses are the same. They were set at $50. So when the Legislative Council walks you through the bill, you'll see temporary license for an advisor is $50. And I wanted it to be the same for all the professions that use a temporary license and less specifically called out in statute. And so that is why I recommend $70 there. Again, body piercing and tattooing is another profession where for the initial application, their fee has not been touched since 1997. Using the inflation tool, it would have made the initial application for this profession extremely high. And I know this profession well from my time within OPR. They are not a group of individuals who can pay a large amount of fees. They're very entrepreneurial people, very creative people. And I want to make sure that they can easily open a tattoo shop or a body piercer shop, that there's not an unnecessary barrier there.
Their renewal fee is zero?
Their renewal fee for the apprentice is zero. I believe it's non-renewable. Just for the body piercer and tattoo apprentice, but for all the other profession types within that profession, the renewal fee will be $275.
You said the renewal fee was zero because there's no renewal.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I heard the second half of your sentence. Okay.
That was the end of the salmon and the advisors.
Yes, and corporation fees, from what I understand, are pretty much inflationary.
And just so I could add a little
Why
context.
is this one gray?
Oh, it's just because I will turn it not gray.
Ah, thank you.
Yes. That's in order to get it a PDF, I just.
Thank you, that makes sense.
And for corporations fees, again, the majority of the fees here have not been touched since 1993 or 2003. You can see that throughout the sheet. And we are learning on our previous experiences with the OPR fund. We are about to, we just published an RFP, a request for proposal for a new IT system for corporations. We do have a small fund balance in this Secretary of State fund, but we are concerned about our IT spend and not having enough revenue to cover that IT spend, which is why we are making these this inflation request to this committee.
What would an RFP for relicensing proposal include?
For
How's
the,
that different from what you'd figure out on your own?
the RFP is a request for proposal from vendors to provide the IT solution.
Oh, I
It's
see.
through ADS procurement process, and so we are going out to procurement for a new software provider for our entire corporation.
Makes good sense. I didn't get the IT connection.
Yeah.
Is that going to be related to the business portal that we saw statutory language for yesterday from the
So-
workforce bill?
It is related, but it is separate. So the Biz portal is, will be a shell that the user comes into that will then connect it into the corporation system, that business user into the corporation system, into the tax system, into the labor system, and into the ACCD system. But each of our agencies needs a standalone system. So what we're going out for procurement on is our standalone corporation system.
And ADS is going to help you have all those systems talk to each other?
That is the goal of the Biz portal.
Oh my God.
And the goal is for the end user to seamlessly navigate all the systems.
What a goal.
What a goal.
What a goal.
We'll get there.
You know, Madam Chair, the IT feels to me like a one-time expense. Could we use a chunk of money to pay for that?
So I don't get to make any decisions about one-time expenses. That's the appropriations committee. But I do think that part of what the appropriations committee is doing this year is looking at how to sort of balance that with the need for fees. So similar again to the transportation fund,
Okay.
using the one-time money to cover some of it and then appreciating our help with raising fees to sort of cover into the future.
Compromise.
Yes, yeah, totally, yeah.
Right, great. I didn't know that.
Any?
So we have no salmon on this page.
Thank you. Okay, no salmon on the page. So Becky is drafting the legislative language on this. It's gonna look exactly like the legislative language that we saw yesterday for the T-bill, but it's gonna be about this instead of the T-bill. I didn't think it was necessary to ask her to come in on the draft when we're not gonna, but I'm not telling you, and it's like, you know, pretty much as boring as legislative language gets. And it will, again, exactly sort of match up and be in the order that is here on the spreadsheet. Does anyone else on the OPR team want to dive in here? Or anything else you want to share with us, Lynn?
I just am very thankful for this committee's work on this issue. I know that it is hard to contemplate raising fees for individuals or for businesses. But I hope that these spreadsheets, which I'm very grateful, I want to say a debt of gratitude to Ted. I'm very grateful for the work that he's done because I think it really does show how our fees have gotten outpaced because they haven't been looked at routinely. And the only other thing that I'll say is that I really hope that we build a cadence where we look at fees regularly.
Yeah.
I'm just so glad that you anticipated and got ahead of any uncomfortability amongst board model participants, because that will save us all the calls. And, you know, if we go ahead and say we can't do it the old way.
I can't promise you that you won't receive calls.
No, I understand that, and that comes with the job, but I'm glad you anticipated.
We did our level best.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are ahead of schedule, team, but, okay, is the idea that Nolan starts the next bill, or is it that?
Katie's not available.
Katie's not available, okay. If David can come, sure.
Want to take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, we're gonna take a 5-minute break and find some new people.
Jen and I could also do the manufacturing.
Is Jen,
She just went to get tea, she'll be right back.
oh, Jen's gonna be right back? Okay,
Your stuff's still right here, so that's another option.
okay.